All right, there we go. All right, everyone. Welcome to today's YPATA call, which is going to be building bridges, engagement strategies for YPAs. So today we're really going to be discussing how to meet youth where they are so that we can foster trust, connection, and engagement. And this will, of course, be presented by myself. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Maiko or Mimi Phillips. I'm the training coordinator here at Families Together. I'm a formally credentialed youth peer advocate. I have unfortunately aged out. So I have my own lived experience navigating mental health systems on my own behalf, and I am a credentialed family peer advocate. So I have experience navigating systems as a caregiver as well. So I just want to take a moment to welcome you all and to let you know that this is an interactive training. So please feel free to ask questions, make comments, cite your concerns, jump in wherever you see fit. You can feel free to bring yourself off of mute or pop things in the chat. Again, this meeting will be recorded, and so if for whatever reason you need to leave early, there will be a copy of this on our YouTube. And if you haven't checked it out, we do have a database of old TA calls for you to watch for your own professional development on there as well. Cameras are again optional, so if you need to step away, please feel free to turn your camera off. Or if you would just like to keep your camera off, that is absolutely okay. We just ask that you participate by bringing yourself off of mute or populating your answers in the chat. Please feel free to use the chat often. There's a lot of engagement opportunities throughout this. And of course, share from experience. So let me know what your experience is, whether it's been as a youth who's navigated systems, or if you have thoughts and feelings that align, or even as a youth peer advocate as you are helping other youth traverse the system. So we're going to just get started by going over our learning objectives. So today we are going to identify barriers to youth engagement. We will apply relationship-centered engagement strategies, utilize creative outreach approaches, and respond effectively to resistance. So just learning some different methods for how we can respond to youth that may be a little disengaged from us in services. And then also develop your personal engagement toolkit. So as usual, we are going to start with introductions and icebreakers. So I told you a little bit about myself. As you introduce yourself, I see that plenty of you are introducing yourself in the chat. Thank you so much for that. If you'd like to continue to introduce yourself and want to come off of mute, this would be the time to do so. We ask that when you introduce yourself, you please include your name, your pronouns, your agency, your role, the county that you work in, and today's icebreaker is going to be, what is the superior pizza topping? So I'm going to start us off, and again, I think I like to be a little special things because I feel like my opinions probably don't match the opinions of others. But I'm going to be honest, and I will say that my superior pizza topping is definitely pineapple. I know a lot of people say it doesn't belong on pizza, but I put it on my pizza and I feel like it enhances it. I like a little salty sweet combination. So, with that being said, I'll give you each a moment. I'll put myself on mute, and if we want to start with the Families Together staff in the room.
Hi, I guess it's still morning, so good morning, everybody. My name is Emma Adler, and I am one of the Youth Workforce Development Coordinators here at Families Together. And for me, I would say I love mushrooms on my pizza, so for me, that has to be number one.
Hi everyone, I'm Kezia. I am the other Youth Workforce Development Coordinator here at Families Together. And for me, I love pineapple and jalapeno. I love a spicy sweet moment.
Hi guys, I'm Echo. My pronouns are she, her, and I work with White House. I work in Warren County. I'm a youth peer advocate and I also do anti-traffic coordinating. And I would say I also really like pepperoni and pineapple. It's like that spicy sweet, it gets you right in the good mood where you're like, ooh, spice, ooh, sweet. And yeah, it's good stuff.
Hi, I'm Sophia, she, her pronouns. work with OMH as a youth peer specialist, and I guess I really like eggplant on pizza. It's rare to find, but it's actually really good.
Hi, I'm Tiana Adler. Um, I'm a youth peer specialist with OMH in the Office of Advocacy and Peer Support Services. And the only thing I will put on my pizza is more cheese. Just just cheese, sauce, and bread, and I think that's all it needs. And yeah, I can.
How we doing, everyone? My name's Vernon Young. My pronouns are he, him. I work for OMH and the Office of Advocacy Peer Support Services. I'm a youth peer specialist. I'm in Albany County, and I like bacon on my pizza, honestly. Maybe some broccoli with it here and there, but that's mostly it.
Alrighty. I haven't seen anyone else come off of mute. If you'd like to introduce yourself, I will happily give you a moment to do so. I did see that almost everyone introduced themselves in the chat, so welcome, welcome. Very happy to see all of you today. And I love our sharing of the superior pizza toppings because one, I think if we got a pizza with all these toppings, it would be delicious. And Tiana, I am totally with you on extra cheese, and I'm also fine with just like regular cheese pizza. Being a New York City girl, though, I feel like that it has to be like a New York City pizza though. Awesome. So, one of the reasons that I asked this question, and I know it seems like a little bit of a silly question, but I feel like we can all probably agree or disagree about the toppings that we might like on our pizza because we all have things that we enjoy or don't enjoy eating. And I feel like that's kind of the basis of engagement, right? Finding something that you either can agree on or that you can disagree on and just trying to find some common ground. So, as we move into talking about engagement, I just figured this would be kind of a good starting place. And welcome, Desiree. Thank you for introducing yourself. Ooh, that's a good combo. Cheese, pepperoni, and pineapple. I like it. Alrighty, so I wanted to start us off with a quick reflection. So this doesn't necessarily have to be you in the youth peer advocate role, but just you as a youth in general. Think about a time when someone successfully connected with you when you didn't really want to engage. What did that person do that made a difference? So one of the ways that I think about this is I am not always the most social person, especially when I'm like out and about. And there has been some times where I've run into like a random person that I don't necessarily know in a store. I can think of this happening last week. I went to the pet store, was looking at some pet food, and there was an older lady in there just in the same aisle, and she happened to like say hi to me. I had my headphones in. I was definitely like in my own zone, just walking my dog, chilling out. And she said something to me and I couldn't hear her. But what was interesting was I was willing to like take my headphones out and have a moment with her. And I think the thing that made the difference was that like she smiled at me. She gave me some sort of positive energy, even though I was like very disconnected from kind of the world around me. I was just shopping for dog food. And we ended up having a conversation about the types of dogs that we like, and then finding out that her grandson actually went to a school that I used to work at, and ultimately ended up having like a 10-minute conversation with a random stranger because of this, but we were able to find some common ground. So I feel like the difference there was that they smiled at me. Can you guys think about a time where someone connected with you and what did they do that was different?
For me, I would probably say like going to my first like high school dance or whatever. Like I was very nervous to do that. And so I had I was talking to my friends about it, and they had actually come up with like a plan on how we can make it a little bit more fun, like maybe do like a little bingo of like meeting with new people or doing something a little bit more interesting and to make it more of a calmer experience. Like I'm not as intimidated. So I think that just having that support with my friends and my community, that made it like more easier to approach because I also experienced like social anxiety as well. So yeah, that helped.
Thank you for sharing. I think trying to find like something that's less awkward. I think sometimes we're just like, I don't want to be awkward in a like in a social space. So I like that you had support from like, your friends and your community to like, make just going to like your first dance just a little less nerve-wracking. Thanks for sharing. Can anyone else think of a time where someone connected with you and you didn't really want to engage?
My example is sometimes, like in high school, I'd be like not in a really good mood in the morning. I'm not really a morning person. And I would walk to school every day with my best friend. And, most mornings I'd be like, ugh, I don't actually want to be here. And I'd go out, I'd be like, I don't want to talk to anybody. And then he'd like do something silly, like walking up to my house. And I'd immediately be like, okay, I feel better.
Yeah, doing something that breaks the ice and makes you more comfortable. I love that. I think laughter is a really like good way to kind of open up something silly. Vernon, I saw that you came off of mute. Would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I was just gonna add that sometimes I use the elevator like at my job, and that's usually how I connect with a lot of people. I can go back and reflect to one time where I just constantly see one of our coworkers in the elevator constantly. Like we're just always there at the same time, ironically. So it just happened. Like we just started talking, and then we just eventually connected off that. And then now when we see each other in the hallways, it's like, hey, what's up? Like, how was your weekend? So just different stuff like that definitely helped me interact with people.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. I think we often talk about like elevator pitches and things like that, but I feel like sometimes like the elevator is that like mixing spot. You just happen to be in the same place at the same time all the time and find like a common space to be with someone. I see that Facia said, I'm gonna be honest, I don't usually engage when I don't want to. I think that that's totally fine, and there are a lot of youth that are like that as well. So thanks for sharing. Echo?
I feel like honestly, I know the library is supposed to be like a quiet space, but there's a time where I was just like doing my own thing, and some old man came up to me and asked me what I was reading. And at first I was like, come on, man, I'm trying to read my book. But then I really thought about it, and I'm like, for him to show curiosity when we're in like a space full of opportunities to be distracted by any book or any media or anything possible, but to try and find connection, like in some way I want to reach for that back because he's attempting, and we live in a world where it's really hard to I feel like it gets harder and harder every year to connect with strangers. And just him asking what I was reading and showing interest in that kind of opened the door for me of like, when I go to the library now, I'm not just like thinking of myself, but I also go to like the recently returns and I think about the people there and what they got and just what other people like how they engage with the library and how they engage with their own world through books. It's made me more open and maybe not the best for the library's sake because I go up to people now and I ask them what they're reading. So
I love that. One of the things that really stuck out to me was that you said like leading with curiosity in a space where you could easily be distracted by a lot of other things. And I think that that's so much of our world nowadays. Like someone's typically on their phone, they have their headphones in, we're distracted, we're thinking about other things, we're consumed with our own thoughts. And I don't think that we do it as humans to be like egotistical, but we just tend to be isolated in our own worlds and our own bubbles. So I like that you're like, I found a reason to engage with someone because they gave me that olive branch. They reached out to me, and instead of shying away from that, I leaned into that curiosity. But then I really like how you said like it kind of fostered even further curiosity for you, where now like it's become a part of your ritual when you go to the library to think about other ways that you can engage with people. And I think that that's kind of like a great thing. We're going to talk about shared interests later on. And I think that like going to a library, like you might find a shared interest in the type of genre someone wants to read or the story types that they enjoy, or even just an author. Or like what interests them about a book. Like sometimes it's really interesting is to ask someone like, what made you want to read that? It's just like I would look at that book and I probably wouldn't pick it up. So just interesting conversation starters. And I see we have in the chat, I'm thinking about a bunch of times where I don't want to engage and the person around me aren't pressuring me to, which makes me feel more comfortable casually joking around once in a while. Yes, I think that that's such a good thing too to point out is like the lack of pressure. Like if you're in a library or if you're in a store, even with a stranger, like I think that there's less pressure than a social expectation of how you should respond or how you should show up. So thank you guys so much for sharing this. I really wanted us to just reflect as we kind of then shift our mindsets into like, what does this look like for youth when we're working with them as youth peer advocates? So first we're going to start with the role of the YPA. We go over this pretty often. But I always think that it's important to kind of think about what our role is depending on what we're talking about. So, for us as youth peer advocates, we want to help our youth connect to support systems, to different opportunities that are available to them, to different resources, hope, and especially their own strengths. So, I like to think of us as bridge builders. And so that's literally why we call this training building bridges. So, as you can see, if you're the YPA in the middle, you're definitely helping your youth connect to all these different places. And we tend to actually hold a lot of the power there. And so, what I like to think about is what are the ways that I can give that power back to the youth and help them form those connections on their own? So, when we do this, what we're asking for our youth to do is to engage with us. And why does engagement matter? Engagement opens doors for youth to find support. So that might mean that they now are finding resources that they can use to help aid in issues that they are seeing in their community or that they're sustaining, even if that is, connections to food, connection to services like therapy, connections to, outpatient programs and things that they can benefit from. They also opens the door to opportunities. And so oftentimes when we're meeting with youth and we're setting goals and objectives, our youth might have their own things that they're looking for. So maybe they want to go to college, they want to enroll in a different type of program, they want to find, peers that they enjoy being around. And so we definitely help them engage with opportunities. Engagement also opens up the door for skill building. So when our youth are engaged with us, especially as youth peer advocates, that's when we can really get into the nitty gritty of actually, working with them on their skills, figuring out what it is that our youth need support in and how we can help them bridge that gap in order to make those skills, contribute to the different goals and objectives that they have so that they can meet them and find a life that they find fulfilling. It definitely also opens them up to community connection. So if a youth is engaged, that means that they're probably willing to go outside and have some of those commentaries that we were just talking about. So maybe they want to talk to someone in the elevator. Maybe they want to go to the library and find someone who has a shared interest or get involved in an after school club or something where they can actually find their community, whether that aligns with part of their identity, part of their shared interest, or just different things that they might be looking for. It also definitely helps with hope. And so when our youth are engaged with us, especially because as youth peer advocates, we spend a lot of time sharing our lived experience, we can help our youth connect to hope, finding different ways to understand what their specific resiliency journey is going to look like and what recovery can look like for them. And last but not least, self-advocacy. So as youth peer advocates, while we do advocate for our youth, we really want to push them to advocate for themselves. And so when they're engaged with us, we can help them work on those skills, but also help them engage with different ways of self-advocacy. Alrighty, so we're going to pivot a little bit and we're going to go into identifying barriers to youth engagement. And welcome, Ayana. Nice to see you. So we're going to go into identifying the barriers to youth engagement because it kind of makes sense if we're going to talk about how to engage youth, we got to talk about what stops them from engaging with us in the first place. So I just want to check in with you guys really quickly. I do have a poll in here, and if you give me 1 second, I think I'll be able to start it. I want to ask you guys that are in the room, what's your biggest engagement challenge right now? And if you're not working with youth, what do you think the biggest engagement challenge is when working with youth? So I'm going to launch that poll. It is completely anonymous, so feel free to just put in what your heart desires, and then we'll talk about it. Alrighty. So I think we've got answers from almost everyone in the room that has opened the poll. Awesome. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll and share the results with you guys. So, for the biggest engagement challenge right now, there were a couple of different options. So there was youth don't respond to phone calls or text messages, which someone said that's definitely one of their biggest engagement. It looks like the biggest amongst the entire group was building trust. Not surprising there. We also have youth don't want services, transportation or access barriers, and one person said other. So if that person would like to share, you're more than welcome to come off of mute or pop it in the chat. What does that engagement challenge look like for you? I never want to put someone on the spot, so. And as we think about these results and these challenges, I kind of wanted to discuss with you guys what stands out from these responses and which challenge feels the most familiar to you. So I know that I asked you to choose one, but I know that you may have experience working with, more than one of these. So if you want to share what that other challenge is, or if you want to answer the discussion questions, now is the time. And I'll go ahead and I'll actually put myself on mute, and have you guys share. So what stands out from these responses and which challenge feels the most familiar? See, we have in the chat, I think building trust and getting them to want to engage in the first place can be hard at first. Yeah, absolutely. I always like to walk people back to, especially if you're a youth peer advocate in the room, like thinking about your first time having to engage with someone in the services. I have to be honest, like most of us aren't really willing to engage. And sometimes there's a couple of variables. Number one, did our youth ask to be here? Sometimes our youth might have, youth peer advocate services recommended to them because they're having some sort of deficit in a different system. So they might be engaged with the service and someone says, I think it'd be really great for you to have a youth peer advocate, but they don't know how to trust us. This is like our first meeting. We're sitting down with them. We're like, "Hey, I'm a youth peer advocate. This is what I do for work, and how can I help you?" And they're like, "I don't want help. I didn't ask for this. Someone else told me I had to be here and I needed to engage with you." And so I feel like that's a good place to just kind of think about like sometimes they don't necessarily want to engage with us because they may not be just here on their own accord or know exactly how we can help them. I see we also the challenges that I deal with the most. Is lacking connection and trust. The youth usually have been trying to access services or figure out the system for so long that they become hostile towards people trying to help because of the past. Yes. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that it's really important that we definitely lean into and justify how youth may feel just based on their system engagement. It's really important that we understand that some youth may have a negative connotation of the system, or they might be showing up in different ways and not getting the results that they want. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Actually, on the next slide, we're going to talk about the impact of systems on engagement. So I like to point out that sometimes youth aren't resistant. They're responding, and they're often responding to the circumstances that are around them. So, understanding the impact of navigating child serving systems is crucial to improving youth engagement. And as youth peer advocates, we need to recognize that the young people that often appear resistant are often just responding to their experiences within these systems rather than displaying a lack of interest or motivation. So, first, we can consider broken promises that they may have encountered. Imagine expecting support from someone and then feeling let down when it doesn't arrive. This can definitely affect a young person's willingness to engage further. We can also think about staff turnover. I know that sometimes we even talk about this in other places where our youth peer advocates are like, hey, I'm leaving this organization, I'm moving, have other things going on in my life. My lived experience hasn't quite ended and I need to focus on myself. Sometimes there's staff turnover. And so now this youth who has previously made a great connection with their youth peer advocate knows that they can depend on them. Now all of a sudden they're being forced to have to talk to a new youth peer advocate or to a new case manager or to a new therapist. And they're like, I just formed a connection with this person. I just started to trust you. And now you want me to start all over. And so sometimes that, kind of shutdown or that lack of wanting to engage is just them responding to the situation that they're going through. Um, a lot of the times, and we talk about this a lot, I don't necessarily think that this happens as youth peer advocates, but in the systems that we're dealing with, youth are often talked about instead of talked with. And so in rooms, because the youth might be the youngest person, whether that's in an IEP meeting, a 504 plan meeting, even just getting a care plan meeting done or a safety plan, the youth is talked about. They may be present in the room, but case managers, therapists, psychologists, they all are kind of taking the lead in these meetings and they're talking amongst the adults in the room, but there's not typically a lot of input from the youth where people turn to them and say, what do you think? Or what can this plan look like for you? And that's where our role comes in as youth peer advocates, because in those meetings, we want to help redirect things back to the youth voice and back to that youth so that they can have that input in these systems and in that planning so that the plan looks like and reflects what they want. Yes, we talk about having individualized plans, but that doesn't matter if the youth voice isn't heard. Because if you just prescribe something for them and tell them that this is what they need to do, they're not likely to engage. So when a youth has typically been talked about instead of talked with, they don't really want to interact with us because they don't realize, one, the strength of their voice, they've been ignored before, and they don't really know how they can actually make that stop happening. It tends to be a reoccurrent cycle. And again, this is typically something that's systemic, not something that's personal. So I'm not saying that this is what we do as youth peer advocates, but sometimes it might just be the norm at an agency or in a hospital setting or just in medical and clinical practices in general. The other thing that youth might be reacting to is constant assessments. So sometimes, when a youth does have to engage with the system, we talk about the different assessments that they may have. And dealing with that means typically dealing with multiple service providers, which can be really overwhelming. It's kind of like being in a constant state of evaluation without feeling understood or supported. And I think that this also can potentially hinder youth because it tends to place labels on them. When you're evaluating them, we tend to place labels, and these labels typically aren't positive. They're not strength-based. They're talking about what their deficits are or what their diagnosis may be and the different things that they need. And it's not to say that evaluations don't help our youth and don't help them access the services that they need. But when they're under that constant scrutiny, they may not feel like engaging with us because they don't feel like it's going to yield positive results. Again, having to deal with multiple service providers, our youth can typically be overwhelmed by the system where they're just like, I have a social worker, I have a case manager, I have my youth peer advocate, I have a family peer advocate that I meet with, and I have all these different people, and I feel like I have to have all these different conversations and handle all these different expectations because everyone's going to expect something different from that youth. And sometimes that within itself is just overwhelming. And so sometimes, again, them shutting down, they're just overwhelmed. And when you're overwhelmed, it's really hard to figure out what your path forward is. And last but not least, just going back to not having their voice heard. Again, we talk about youth being in a lot of adult spaces. And even though we're talking about child serving systems, it's typically the adults that are on the table that are leading those conversations or leading those decisions. And so when the youth doesn't have their voice heard, they typically don't want to engage with us. So, I want us to go back to another reflection, just a quick reflection. So think about your experience navigating the systems when you were a youth, or your work with a youth as a youth peer advocate. What do you think the system has taught youth about trusting adults? You can feel free to come off of mute or pop it in the chat. If we're having a hard time, I can definitely start us off. I think sometimes, oh, someone popped it in the chat. Thanks. Youth typically do not trust adults. There's a huge disconnect between youth and adults. Yeah, I think that that is one of the things that the system teaches our youth, unfortunately, is that they can't trust adults. And sometimes that's because when they do trust adults, those adults might have to take action in a way that doesn't really suit the youth. And so, whether that means that they're a mandated reporter, whether that means that they refer them to additional services, or whether it just means that they're kind of talked down to in a way that's not youth guided, where, they're kind of belittled. Their thoughts and their feelings are just belittled and they're not quite understood, or just a societal just kind of difference. Like we talk about the difference between generations when we talk about millennials, Gen X, Gen Alpha, and all these different things. And it's hard when you're dealing with an adult who just has never experienced the system or experienced life the way that you have as a youth. I see we also have that it's contingent upon implied lack of judgment, positive regard, and successful rapport building. But also, systems are ageist. Sometimes, as adults, can talk down to youth or not let them be too self-directed. Absolutely, yes. I think in a lot of spaces, adults mean well, and they they really do mean well, and they want to help our youth. But sometimes they are hindering them from being self-directed and allowing them to walk their own paths. The systems sometimes teach the youth that the adults always know best or have the answers, and that youth don't know anything about themselves. Yes, thank you so much for that. I think that sometimes the system unfortunately makes the adult the expert in the room rather than the youth. And we talk so much about, being youth peer advocates. The youth really are the expert of their own lives. They know what they need. They know what's going to work for them because they are living it and they're going through it. The same way that each of us is our own expert of our lives in our own respect. Majority of my youth feel as though there's no privacy, so it took a lot for them to trust me. They felt as if I would go back and tell the guardian everything. Absolutely, yes. A lot of the times, depending on what system this youth is navigating, that documentation is just kind of open to an adult, or that person is going to report back to their trusted adult in their life often. Whereas a youth peer advocate, we are here to capitalize on the youth voice. So we can actually tell our caregivers, no, I'm not going to have that conversation with you. I'm going to hold that in privacy. And the only time that I would share something with someone is if there was a potential risk for safety. So if the youth said that they were going to hurt themselves or harm someone else because I'm a mandated reporter, then I would share that with an adult. Outside of that, what my youth says to me is between me and my youth. And I think that that is different, being a youth peer advocate. Um, Another thing that I think that sometimes youth are taught is that adults leave. Sometimes it's not what we mean to do, but I think that our youth have experienced adults leaving, whether that means, they leave a program because they move on to a different position, or simply they just leave, whether it's their lives. Like when we talk about lived experience, we sometimes talk about our youth that are involved in foster care, our youth that are involved in different systems because their parents, their loved ones, the adults that are around them are not someone who's trustworthy or can keep them safe. And so sometimes that's something that a youth will learn just traversing the system as well. Thanks for sharing your answers, guys. I very much appreciate the conversation. So let's talk a little bit about why youth disconnect. The common assumptions. So the common assumptions that are made are typically that our youth are unmotivated, they don't care, they're resistant, and my favorite word that adults like to use, they're non-compliant. The truth is, while this might be assumptions, this is typically not the reason why youth are disconnected. So let's talk about the reality about why our youth might be disconnected. Our youth are often experiencing a plethora of feelings. So they might be experiencing fear, anxiety, shame, trauma, depression, previous disappointments, basic need challenges, service fatigue, feeling judged, or a lack of trust. And that, even if it's just one of these things that a youth is feeling, might cause them to disconnect. That means disconnecting with us, disconnecting with services, and even disconnecting with their community and those that are around them that could support them. So I think that it's important that when we think about this, that we start to reframe resistance. So in order to do this, we have to explore the underlying messages that a youth might be conveying when they appear resistant, especially with that understanding that what we're assuming probably isn't correct. So I kind of want to lean back into what Echo was talking about earlier today, which means approaching things with curiosity. So when we approach with curiosity, if a youth says, I'm good, or I don't need help, or stop texting me, or honestly nothing at all and doesn't respond to us, they might actually be saying something deeper. They might not yet trust the process. And again, this can be due to those past disappointments or feeling overwhelmed by their situation, or simply just not knowing what a youth peer advocate is, what our role is, and how we can assist them. So it's important to recognize that they might not know how to ask for help yet, or they might simply want to maintain control over their choices. And sometimes for a youth, the best way to do that is to keep things to themselves. So, by acknowledging these possible interpretations, we can approach with empathy and patience and ensure that we create a supportive environment where trust can be built and genuine communication can flourish. I always say that instead of asking, what's wrong with this youth, we can ask, what is this youth communicating to us? I do want to point out too, if a youth says something like, stop texting me, that's a boundary that they're setting. And we probably should listen. I know that sometimes we kind of want to push those boundaries, but we do want to listen to them and let them know that, you do have the power to set this boundary and you have the power to say no, whether that's no to someone who's on your treatment team, even if that means us as a youth peer advocate. You have the power to say no and say, this programming doesn't work for me, this service option doesn't work for me. They have the ability to withdraw from any part of their recovery journey as they see fit, because again, it's their recovery journey and it's really important that we meet them wherever they are. So another way that we can see this is by remembering that resistance is communication. So when we ask ourselves, what might this youth be trying to tell me? We can kind of think about these four windows. And so we start with resistance, meaning that our youth does not want to engage with us. Typically, there's a gap between that resistance and building a relationship. And what stands in that gap is either a lack of information or a lack of understanding. And so if our youth doesn't have all the information that they need in order to make an informed decision, they're probably not going to engage with us. The same way, if they don't understand things, they can't engage with us. If they don't understand what's expected at a meeting, if they don't understand who's going to be there, if they don't understand what someone's role is, if they don't understand what their options are, a youth literally cannot engage with the system in a way that's meaningful to them. And so I often like to think about like what's the difference in between the two are. So going from resistance to relationship, we typically want to make sure that we're providing our youth with all the information that they need to make an informed decision and that we're also extending understanding. So we're asking them questions so that we can gain a better understanding and also make sure that they understand all of the things that are in control and that they are in control. It's often important too that we note that resistance is often self-protection. So resistance is typically that way of a youth trying to shield themselves based on their current challenges or even their past experiences. And I do believe when we can adopt this perspective, we can help build a stronger and more empathetic relationship because we can understand they're not just, disengaged because they don't like me. We don't have to take it personally. We can understand there's a gap here and I can be that bridge and I can actually help fill that gap. So let's take a look at engagement a little bit further. One of the ways that I like to think about engagement is as a continuum. So if we start down here, we start with our youth being disconnected. So this is when our youth is like, I'm not responding to phone calls, I'm not responding to text messages, I'm not coming to those meetings. They are simply disconnected. No matter how we outreach them, they're not participating in any conversation. Typically from there, a youth can move to observing. So they might show up to the meeting, but they may not say much. They're just kind of observing. They're kind of figuring things out. Typically when a youth is observing, however, they are also filling in that information part. They are trying to gather information about what's going on around them. They're just not quite acting on it, perhaps because of a lack of understanding or because of a lack of them having all of the information that they need in order to make a decision. From there, we move into responding. So this is when our youth, you text them and you say, hey, how's your day going? And they say, it's fine. So they're responding. They might say very little in the meetings. They're not really expressing themselves fully, but they are responding to things that we are asking of them. And we can move from responding to participating. So this is really the difference between a youth just saying yes or no, or just kind of, giving you very short answers to really participating in the process. So this is where they are really going to start asking questions. They are going to start really coming to those meetings. It's no longer an expectation that they're going to show up 40 minutes late. They're going to show up on time. They're going to be there. They are, going to participate in the meeting the way that they're expected to. So if they're just expected to sit there quietly because the adults are leading, they're going to do that. But what I like to do is to kind of push them to be engaged. So this is where we tend to find, the sweet spot of engagement. This is where we like all of our youth to really be with us as YPAs, where they're engaged. We can have conversations and dialogue back and forth. We can ensure that they understand things. And now at this point, now they're asking those deeper questions. They're trying to gain further understanding. And they really are starting to fully understand what is capable of them and also what the responsibility of the system is. But it doesn't just stop there because once our youth are engaged, our responsibility as youth peer advocates is to push them one step further, and that's into leading. That's when our youth are taking control of things. And so for us as youth peer advocates, it's really important that we try to move into that step of letting our youth lead. So helping them find those skills to advocate for themselves helps them build that skill, creating space where they can lead. And so instead of, me coming in as the youth peer advocate and saying, okay, well, these are the things we're going to work on today, I can give them choices. I can allow them to say, these are my goals and my objectives, and I want to set them. When we go into meeting spaces with care management teams, we allow our youth to lead by saying, this is what I want my care plan to look like, and these are the things that I believe will help me, rather than allowing the adults that are in the room to lead. And so engagement is really a continuum. And it's also important to note that just because a youth doesn't engage with you in a certain way, it might just be around that goal or objective. I have youth that are very willing to participate in meetings, but on the other end, when it comes to, skill building, they're pretty disconnected and they're like, I don't really want to work on that skill. The same way they might be really open to leading open conversation with me about their shared interest or social medias. But when it comes down to, okay, well, now we have to sit down and we have to make your care management plan, they might just be on more of an observing place and be asking, those questions as to like, okay, well, this is what my mom said. I'm just kind of repeating it back to you. They're observing, they're responding, but they're not really at that place where they're engaged and they're asking those questions or making it about them. And so it's really important to note that we can meet our youth anywhere in this continuum, and that it's just our job as youth peer advocates to support them as they move through it and to always promote that they are going to get to that point of leading. And so we're going to talk about the different skills that we can use for that as well. Excuse me. So first I have a little bit of an activity for you guys. So what counts as progress? So on here I have 4 different scenarios. We're going to take our time and we're going to go through each one of them, and I'd love to hear from you. Does this count as progress? And where might this youth be? Are they kind of in resistance? Are they seeking information, seeking understanding, or are they building a relationship? So for scenario A, we have a youth who has ignored your text for 2 months, responds and says, I'm okay. Do we feel like progress has been made here with this youth, and why? You're off of mute, but we can't hear you. You're gonna take it. Okay, so I have one person that says probably not. Do you want to explain? I see you're off mute.
Um, I wouldn't take it as an improvement or anything because they're just saying I'm fine. In terms of communication, I guess it is or could be seen as an improvement because they communicated back, but it's not anything that could lead to further conversation. Like how much more can you say after someone says, I'm fine?
I think I could see it that way, but I'll also bring us back to, yeah, thanks, Jay. I was actually going to say, I see where you're saying, Facia, where you're like, perhaps them saying I'm okay doesn't really give you much information to go off of as a youth peer advocate. You're like, okay, you're okay, but like, where have you been for the last 2 months? Where's the extra information? Like, are you really okay? Like, I have questions. But at the same time, I would take us back to this continuum here. So if we go back a slide, our youth was previously disconnected. They weren't responding to us at all. And now they're at least responding. It might not be the way that we want them to, but they are. So yeah, Jay, I would agree with you. I think that there's been progress made here, just in the simple fact that they've gone from being completely disconnected and not responding to us at all to just simply responding to us and just saying, I'm okay. They're allowing us to check in. What about scenario B? A youth attends a meeting, but they don't say anything. And yes, Jay, I do agree. Any tiny progress is still progress. So what about this next scenario? A youth attends a meeting, but they don't say much. Do we feel like progress is being made here? And then I can take you guys back here. Where do you think this youth would be? They attend the meeting, but they don't say much.
Well,
Ooh,
we don't know where they would go over that. That's the thing. Because, like, what if they went backwards?
yeah. I think Ayana seconds that too, Tiana. Is this the first meeting or is this multiple meetings in? Even still, you would say it's progress because they showed up, but it does kind of matter. Like, were they previously like super engaged with us and then they started observing? Yes, give them credit for at least showing up to the meeting and attempting. So yeah, I would say that they're probably in this 1 to 2 range. They're pretty disconnected because they're just not really saying much in the meeting, but they seem to be observing. They seem to be trying to figure out a little bit of the things that are going on. What about scenario C? Oh, actually, I just wanted to bring up too. If a youth is attending a meeting but doesn't say much, they're probably also kind of within these two cycles here, where we're going to want to make sure that they have more information and that they have a better understanding of what's available to them in the meeting so that they can fully participate. And hopefully that can help us build the relationship and build that gap as well so that they go from resistance to relationship. So, scenario C, a youth declines services but then asks, what exactly do you do? Where's that youth? They could be a two, so they could be observing. Kind of a four, too. I like how you're like, I'm in between. I agree with you. I agree with you. Anyone else want to chime in? To give their opinion is engaging in some way. And so they're probably a little bit more towards the engaging. So I would say perhaps they're participating. So at this point, they're asking questions. They're actually asking us and they're saying, I don't want services. So they are saying, I don't want services, which means they are responding to us. They're letting us know what their wishes are, but they're also asking, what exactly do you do? So they're participating in the conversation to at least find out more information and gain further understanding so they can figure out what might work for them or what might not. So yeah, I would say they could be anywhere between a 2 and a 4. And that's why I say it's also a continuum because it really depends on the youth and you would actually probably need further information to really decide, as you guys have said before. All right, our last one. A youth shows up for a meeting, and they show up 15 minutes late instead of not attending at all. So where would we say this youth is? Yeah, somewhere between a 3 and a 4. They're responding, they're participating, and they still showed up. Yeah, I agree. So again, it's a continuum, but I do believe that if this youth previously didn't attend at all, that's showing a huge level of resistance. By them showing up 15 minutes late, they're at least going to gain some information because they're actually going to be involved in the meeting. They're going to gain further understanding, and that can help them build a relationship. And yes, I think that it's really important that we note that any of these circumstances, I'm going to be honest, I would argue that all of these can represent progress because engagement often starts with things like observations, curiosity, small responses, and testing trust before it becomes participation. And so, yes, especially what Kezia says too, we want to praise effort, not perfection. I always say that we want to, talk about progress over that perfection part. Good job, guys. So another thing that we can do is meet our youth where they are. And as we move forward, we're going to talk about the three different places that we can do that. So literally, emotionally, and developmentally. So, I have another reflection for you guys. Think of a youth that you found challenging to engage. And again, we are always HIPAA compliant here, so we don't want to share names or any identifying information. But if you would like to, please share about this youth or what was difficult to engage with them. And think about what barriers existed. What strengths did this youth have? What else may have been happening? What helped move the relationship forward and what didn't work? And I can definitely start us off here. So I remember having a youth who literally would not answer text messages, phone calls. After our first initial meeting where I said, "Hey, I'm your youth peer advocate and this is what I'm supposed to do," it was radio silence for 6 months. Just straight radio silence. I have to be honest, there were a few barriers that existed. Number one, there was a cultural barrier. This person was someone who was of Muslim descent. And a lot of what I didn't recognize is that some of the times when I was reaching out, I was actually reaching out during high holidays for them. And I just simply didn't know this because that's not my religious background and it's not my cultural background. And so they were dealing with that. They were also dealing with the additional barrier of being homeless. And because they were homeless, they actually lacked access to regular services. So this youth was not someone who had regular access to food, which also meant that they didn't have regular access to funds. And so while I was reaching out to them, a lot of the times when I would reach out via text message, I would get bounce backs. When I would reach out via email, I would get radio silence. And 6 months later, when this youth finally came back and walked into the office and was like, "Hey, I want to meet with Mimi," I found out that part of the reason was that they didn't have access to a library. They didn't have the paperwork that was necessary to get their library card. And so they literally didn't have access to a computer. So they couldn't check their email. So the way that I was reaching out to them seemed like it made sense. Like when they filled out the form, they said, "This is my phone number and this is my email." So I thought I was reaching out to them and I was being ignored. But the truth is, the youth never received an email that I sent. They also never really were able to get those text messages because a lot of the times the phone bill wasn't being paid because they literally had a barrier of access to services. And so there was a lot more that was going on besides this youth just being disengaged with me and being disengaged with services. They were trying to traverse life. They were trying to recover. They were trying to figure out what worked for them and also simultaneously going through that with their families. And so this is probably one of the first times where I felt like it was personal, if I'm going to be really honest. And I think that sometimes we do that as youth peer advocates. I really felt like this youth didn't want to engage with me because I was doing something wrong. And once we were able to sit down and have a further discussion, I was able to recommend them to different services. So they were able to get, a prepaid phone that worked for them. I was able to figure out other ways to contact them. And so one of the ways that we actually went about was I would mail letters to their school because they had a school inbox there. And so it would actually work out better for them when they would go to school. They could check in with the main office. And if there was mail for them there, they were able to receive that. Because they were homeless, there was no home address. There wasn't that dependability of having a phone, but we were able to converse with each other that way. And I just sent them a reminder of when we have meetings, and they were always willing to show up. And so I think that sometimes we have to really think about the other barriers that exist that might stop a youth from engaging with us and really not take it so personal. And truthfully, what helped that relationship move forward was that when they reached back out, I was consistent. I was willing to be there. I was willing to adapt, and I was willing to find some flexibility in the way that I showed up for them as youth peer advocates so that I could provide services that worked for them. So, does anyone else have an example of a youth that you found challenging and want to talk about the different ways that you were maybe able to engage with them? I will put myself on mute now. Just giving you guys a second. I'm honestly not sure if anyone might be typing things in because I know that we've had a lot of things in the chat, and I know that this can be a long question to answer. So I just want to give you guys a moment to talk about it, but I'd love if at least one other person could give an example. Ooh, I haven't thought about that in a while. I think parents can unnecessarily cause fear of opening up for fear that it'll get back to them. Yes. So sometimes our youth might be challenging to engage with us because they like fear whatever the repercussions of their parents finding out may be. So yeah, I can definitely see that being difficult. Thanks for bringing that up. Does anyone else want to chime in before we move on from this reflection? Oh, okay, so I see, yes, parents 100%. I'm experiencing a lot of kickback from parents about not feeling involved. So I take this that they don't feel involved in whatever their child is discussing with you or the steps that the child is making. Yes. Okay, got it. Yeah, that can definitely be a barrier as well. I would ask in that circumstance, can either of you think about some strengths that the youth does have in that space that like makes it easier for you as a youth peer advocate to engage with them? And like how, if you're okay with talking about it, how do you navigate um kind of dealing with parents and dealing with that additional kickback that you might be getting from a youth that's like, I don't really want to engage because I'm afraid of what my parents might say. I just like to know how you guys are navigating that. Or if you're like, I don't know how to navigate that. I think being able to be forthright about their disconnect or fear, and I think by trying to frame it as unless your safety is at risk, I try to not let parents tiptoe too much into care unless it's relevant. And majority of my kids just don't want their parents involved. I tell youth and families, parents are on a need to know basis. Absolutely. I think that's a really great way that you guys are navigating that barrier. One, a lot of the work that we do as a youth peer advocate is and can be protected. I will say, and I always say this, and I know I get some pushback from people that are like, what? Just a fair warning, because you are working with a minor in certain circumstances, parents can typically see documentation because it is about a minor that is going through services. And so, with that being said, I like to include my youth in that documentation so that nothing that is not on that need to know parental basis is included in my documentation, if that makes sense. So we can write that we're working on skills, but if my youth is specifically telling me about something, I don't have to include that in my notes. Um, One thing that I can think of that we use as an example in our 4-day training is, let's say you are working with a youth who is dealing with their identity and they have come out to you, but you know for a fact they haven't come out to their family. That's not something I'm going to put in my documentation. Because if I put that in my documentation, there is a risk that that family finds out about it. And truth be told, it goes back to exactly what Echo said. Their safety is not at risk. So as long as their safety isn't at risk, I don't have to put that in my documentation, and that's not something that I want to nor need to discuss with a parent. That is for my youth to decide that they want to discuss with their parent at a later time. I can help them figure out the ways to have that conversation, but it's not my responsibility to have that conversation or to put that information somewhere that it could be seen. So that's me keeping my confidentiality as a youth peer advocate as well. All right. So with that, we're thinking about how we can meet our youth where they are. So literally, like I'm just gonna be really serious. So like, we can literally meet them where they are. So where are the youth spending their time? Typically, our youth are spending majority of their time at home or school. So Can we meet them in their home environment if they find that safe and if we find that safe? Can we meet them at school if that's something that they find safe and that we find safe? And I always say that because not every youth is going to want to meet with you at school because someone's like, who's your counselor? Who's this extra person that you have with you? And so definitely think about that confidentiality. However, meeting them after school or, maybe their school has a playground and hang out with them there can definitely be something that makes it easier for a youth because they're in the space that they feel the most comfortable in. We also have some additional community spaces that we can meet youth in. So the library, maybe a coffee shop. Community centers are great places. Also, community events and even walk and talk meetings. And so I always try to tell people that the best way for engaging youth is literally stepping into their world. Let's consider the different places that they naturally gather, feel the most comfortable. And again, these are not just physical locations, but spaces where a youth can feel a sense of belonging and safety. So again, where are they already spending their time? And then putting myself there so that I can engage with them. And just remembering that this is, again, a community-based service. So, yes, there are some circumstances where when you're working as a youth peer advocate, your supervisor might be like, hey, I really want you to meet in the office as much as possible. But sometimes that office can bring up that, like, kind of cold, sterile environment where they're like, if I talk to you in your cubicle, the person right next to me can also hear me, and this doesn't feel private. I don't like this. And so just making sure that you're finding a space literally where a youth can go and they can feel comfortable having that conversation with you, and sometimes even being on the move. Go to a park, have a little walk and talk. And also, I like to tell my youth straight up when I meet with them for the first time, as your youth peer advocate, I know that we have a rapport with each other. I just want you to know that if I see you outside of this in whatever role, like if we're just walking through the supermarket, I am never going to approach you. And it's not because I am trying to dismiss our relationship, but I want to hold your confidence and your privacy in hand. And so I never want to approach you in a situation where someone's like, who's that? But if you want to approach me, if you want to come say hello because I've seen you in public, that's perfectly fine. But I like to let my youth know that as well so that they know that there's confidentiality, even if we do run into each other in a public space. And that's primarily because as a youth peer advocate, I tend to work with youth that are in my living environment. So I have definitely seen a youth out at Walmart. I've definitely seen a youth out on the weekend while I'm like at the beach. And so I just want them to know, like, again, I'll hold that in confidence. But if you want to come over and say hi to me, that's cool. But I'm never going to answer. Like, someone comes up after me, it's like, who are you? Like, I'm never going to do that. And I've literally had this happen, even working in education with very young children, and their parents are like, who are you? And I'll be like, you can ask them because I just feel like that's more appropriate coming from the youth than it is for me to say like, oh, I'm their teacher or I help them with X, Y, and Z. Maybe that parent doesn't know that, or maybe they're not even with their parent; they're with their grandparent, and their grandparent doesn't know that this child gets services. So that's another place to kind of just make sure that you have that connection, but also can support a meaningful relationship by letting them know that there's boundaries to this as well. All right. And then how can we meet our youth emotionally? So it's really crucial that we acknowledge that there's a diverse range of emotions that a youth might be experiencing. So they might be curious and eager to learn. They could feel ambivalent and unsure about the support that they're receiving. And some might even be skeptical of us, if we're being honest. So they might be questioning our intentions to help or how we might help them differently than the adults that have been in their lives or the services that they've already engaged with. They could be frustrated and that could be like with their circumstances or just frustrated with having to come check in with us, or they can just feel overwhelmed by the challenges that they're facing. So, they can also be, on another note, hopeful. So they might actually be one of those youth that pops up and it's just like, yeah, I really am excited to work with you and to work on my goals and for you to support me on them. And they can also be burned out just from random system engagement and what that looks like for them. So, the key takeaway here is that you can't force a youth to be ready for change or ready for support. But our role as youth peer advocate is to create a safe and supportive environment where they can feel comfortable expressing themselves and exploring their emotions. So I like to validate our youth's emotions. If they're curious about youth peer advocacy and what that looks like, I like to lean into that. If they're ambivalent or skeptical, I like to ask them questions like, how can I make you more comfortable? Or what is it that you need to know from me so that I can ease your worries? If they're burnt out, I like to let them know it's okay to be burnt out. I know that the system's overwhelming, and I think that that's a great place to place empathy and to empathize with them and to say, I can share a little bit of my lived experience because I've gone through different parts of this. But again, make them the star of the show. So still going back to like, how can we use this? How can I help you? And even maybe some coping skills. So how can we help them with deep breathing, journaling to identify their emotions, to deal with them? Can we make referrals if that's what they want? Maybe they do want some outpatient therapy, or maybe they just want some art therapy, and coloring and listening to good music with you is the thing that gets them out of their shell. So again, we're just going to meet them where they are and validate where they are emotionally as well. And last but not least, it's really important that we meet youth where they are developmentally. It's important to note that young people that we're working with are typically exploring their identity. They're trying to figure out who they are, especially depending on the age range of the youth that you're working with. A lot of us typically are working with youth that are between the ages of 12 and 18. So they might be hitting puberty. They might be really trying to figure out, like, who am I? How do I work in these spaces? I think we can all attest that, like, middle school and high school are not the same as elementary school. They are not the same socially, academically, emotionally, the expectations that are on you for just responsibilities, the things that you're expected to get done, even just independence. And so our young people are often seeking independence as well. And they might even be testing boundaries. And so sometimes that means testing boundaries at home with like sneaking out or using substances or different things. But sometimes it means testing boundaries with us too, like maybe using language that isn't so appropriate for their age or talking to us about topics that may not be as appropriate. So it's important to just know that this is what they might be doing and that sometimes they're looking for connection in those things rather than looking for a negative response. And so, how can we kind of navigate that? Developmentally, they might be trying to build confidence. And so I think we can all attest, maybe some of us had easier adolescences than others, but like being an adolescent and being a teenager is just hard. It's just genuinely hard. You're trying to figure out who you are in a whole class of other people that are trying to figure out who they are as well. And so you're trying to build your confidence. You're trying to figure out what works for you, what you enjoy, and also doing that typically under the scrutiny of a society that puts everything on social media. And so there's a lot of comparison. There's a lot of, are you saying this is how I think things should be versus how things are for me? And so that can be hard for them too. But developmentally, they're also learning from their peers. And that means both positive habits and negative habits. And so we talk about peer pressure and all those things. It doesn't mean that they're not learning good things from their peers as well, like their peers that are excelling or their peers that have different shared interests as them. But it's just important that we know that this is where they are developmentally so we can meet them where they are and also understand that we then become a peer that they can learn from. So we can teach them those positive skills if by chance they're surrounded by peers that maybe don't have the best coping mechanisms or maybe are, engaging in more negative behaviors. And overall, developmentally, youth are trying to figure out who they can trust. And that means adults, youth, their peers, and even us. And so, because they're trying to figure this out, it's okay for us to understand that they might show up and be really engaging with us on day one or day three, and then be completely disconnected because we said something that was misunderstood or misconstrued. And they're like, I don't really know if I trust this person. And that also can go back and forth and again be a continuum. So, it's just really important that we understand where our youth are developmentally and that we meet them where they are. Especially if you're dealing with some younger youth, just understanding that when we talk to them, we want to use language that's developmentally appropriate. If they're talking to us about topics, even if that might be more intimate topics like sex and relationships, that we want to use things that are developmentally appropriate for them and refer them to resources that are developmentally appropriate for them as well. Alrighty, so thank you. Did it change now? I apologize. Apparently my slides aren't following, so I'm gonna just go back really quickly in case anyone wants to screenshot them. But emotionally, they might be having all of these different emotions, and I kind of just talked about meeting them where they are. Developmentally, youth may be going through a plethora of different things, and so we just want to make sure that we are meeting them and addressing their developmental needs. All right, responding to disengagement. So, I think it's really important that as youth peer advocates, we know how to respond to disengagement. So, it's important to note that effective responses often include us leading with curiosity, patience, flexibility, empathy, and consistency. And less effective responses often include, I would say, how adults tend to reply to things. So, that means pressure, making assumptions, giving them lectures or ultimatums. Again, we are not here to police you. So I would really stay away from giving them lectures and ultimatums or making assumptions or just applying pressure, but allow them to lead. If they're not comfortable with something, let them know that that's okay. You can revisit it. We can always have another conversation at a later date. Just make sure that they have the information that is necessary for them. And then also think about making sure that you're providing a relationship before compliance. So, oftentimes in our role, whether that's for us or agency guidelines, our services can be really focused on attendance, appointments, goals, and tasks. And I know that this sometimes has to do with funding sources and other things, but at the end of the day, it's really important that as youth peer advocates, we are focused on youth engagement. And that begins with trust, connection, authenticity, and choice. I always like to say that connection creates the conditions for change. So if we can focus on that connection, then we can really focus on then addressing things like attendance and appointments and their goals and tasks and setting them. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, and we will definitely see you on the next one. To the person that's leaving early, bye. Alrighty, so lastly, I just wanted to help you guys out by having some creative engagement strategies that work. So we're gonna build a little toolkit as we finish up here. So, quick question for everyone, and I wanted you guys to be able to pop this in the chat. What is one engagement strategy that has worked well for you? One of the engagement strategies that I really like to work on is it's like a five-finger strength-based thing, and we just literally draw our hands like those turkeys that we did back in elementary school, and on each finger we put a strength in there. And I like to use it as a grounding exercise for my youth. So when they are not feeling like themselves or feeling overwhelmed, they can actually count their physical fingers and remember the exercise that we did, to remember that they are strong, they're beautiful, they are capable of change, and whatever else that they put on their fingers. And we do it together. Anyone else want to share an engagement strategy that has worked well for them? Ooh, music. Always letting them play a song from their favorite artist. I like that. I feel like that helps set the tone. Making collages, yes, or like vision boards, different things like that, where youth can just express themselves. I think art and music are really great places to find connection. Anyone else? Playing a game, yes. Oftentimes, I think that you can have like really casual conversation. I think Tiana was the one that brought up like my friend being silly. Like it just gives you a very calm, cool, collected place to just make connection and have casual conversation. Thank you guys. Outdoor activities, walks, nature center, etc. Yes, I think that gets us out of the clinical setting. So it gets us out of the office. It gets us out of just like sitting across from each other, just looking at each other and staring at each other and, that uncomfortability, and just allows us to be in more natural spaces where we can just talk and let ideas flow freely. Absolutely. So, just a few things to go over for examples that I have for you guys for your toolkit. So, number one, thoughtful texting. I bring this up because let's be honest, most of our youth are not reading really long emails. They're not. So we can text them. And I think that that's a great way to let things be youth led and youth centered. Now, if they prefer an email, definitely send an email. But if possible, and you have a work phone number or you have a Google Voice number, a way that you can protect your identity, I always will stress this: do not send your youth text messages from your personal phone number. Agencies should provide a different way for you to get in contact with them. There's ways to text through email as well, but you can even set up a Google Voice that will keep your identity safe and also make sure that you can like mute things and turn them off. So you can use that to text them. But I would say keep the messages conversational. So instead of like really long scripts that you're putting in there, converse with them. Check in with them. Hey, how's school today? Or whatever it is that you need to have that discussion with them. Avoid using overly formal language. And so I'm not saying that you have to text them with the BRB and all of the other acronyms that we typically use. However, we want to avoid using formal language. Like, we need to work on this whatever assessment at a later time. Like, that probably as a youth would make me shut down. I always say you can use thoughtful texting for celebrating small wins. So sometimes we might have meetings with youth and we're not able to really recap with them or debrief with them after. So even just sending a small text message that says, hey, I really appreciated the way that you were able to advocate for yourself in today's IEP meeting, and celebrating a small win can really take it a step further and allow that youth to know that you were there, they felt seen, and they felt supported. And also send reminders without pressure. So, an example of this, you could text a youth and you could be like, this is your third missed appointment. I'm gonna be honest, they're probably not gonna respond to you. However, saying something that's a little bit more casual, like, hey, I'm just checking in. I hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you'd like to connect, opens the door for them to respond to you. You're not harboring down on the fact that they've missed the appointment. You're just checking in with them. They probably already know they missed that appointment. And if not, at least it gives them an opportunity to connect with you or to just be very honest. I'd like to connect. I don't want to connect. Hey, I'm free at this time or I'm not free at this time. So I would just urge you to send more casual and conversational text messages with your youth while you're connected with them. Another thing is to use shared interests. So, like you guys talked about, there's music, there's gaming, art, sports, fashion, social media, community events, cultural events. You can use all of these shared interests to get to know your youth and to also find spaces to collaborate with them and to get to know them. And so, I like to use all of these kind of as jumping points for conversations and also to bring things back. So, like, if they're having a hard time with setting a goal, like maybe referring to it as something that they enjoy for gaming. So like, can we just treat this like The Legends of Zelda? Like, I know that that level that you were talking about last week was really, really hard, but so was this IEP meeting. But if you can beat that, you can also get through this IEP meeting. Sometimes I know it doesn't make sense, but like for them, it helps and it works because you're just using a shared interest to pivot. So I did want to ask you guys, how can shared interests become relationship building opportunities without crossing boundaries? Does anyone know? It's okay if you don't, because I have answers on the next slide.
I would say like you can connect over that. Like it can be an icebreaker, but then I wouldn't like say you like Legends of Zelda and then you're like, "Oh, I like that too." But then you would be like, "Yeah, we can talk about it, but we shouldn't like play together."
Absolutely. I love that. That's a great example. So, again, these shared interests can be building opportunities where we can talk about things. However, we don't want to cross the boundary over. So, whether that's social media or gaming, like I'm not going to follow them on my social media or allow them to follow me. I will actually probably go through and block most of my youth so that they can't have access to my personal profile if I have social media. Um, and again, yeah, we can talk about Legends of Zelda, but I'm not adding you on the PlayStation Network or Xbox because we're not playing together after this. Like, that's not happening. I was talking before this training and I was like, it's great if we both like the same artist. Like, that's cool. We can't go to the concert together. Like, we can talk about Dua Lipa, we can listen to her music together, but we're not going to that concert together. And if there is a concert in our neck of the woods, I'm going and you can go. And if I see you there, I again am not going to talk to you unless you talk to me. And we can talk about it during our next session. Like, if you want to really recap and debrief, but we're going to live our separate lives. So, yeah, I think being authentic often sometimes can get blurred with boundaries, but being authentic does not mean being boundary free. So, as YPAs, we can be relatable, we can share our lived experience, and we can learn about youth's interests and meet them where they are. But we still want to make sure that we are maintaining professional boundaries, following agency policies, protecting confidentiality, and avoiding those dual relationships. And again, those dual relationships are just things that kind of cross those boundaries. So, being friends with someone rather than just being their YPA, maybe knowing someone from the community and still working with them in a youth peer advocate role, or even being in some sort of relationship with them. Another place that we can engage with youth is community-based engagement. So this would be resource fairs, youth events, school activities, volunteer or leadership opportunities, community celebrations, and cultural events. So these are just different ways that we might be able to bridge that gap and like ask our youth, like, hey, do you want to meet me outside? Like we can go to this resource fair together and we can navigate that if they're looking for a job or if they're looking to get engaged with other peers, like, hey, let's go to this youth event together and maybe you can we can role play so that you can figure out how you could make friends during this and we can kind of work on that skill actively in the environment. There's also low pressure connections. So this includes things like brief check-ins, those walk and talk meetings, texting, celebrating successes, showing up consistently, and having strength-based conversations. So again, whenever you can, just take the pressure off of things and make them less formal and more casual and conversational. And as always, be strength based. So ask our youth, what are you proud of? What's going well? What's keeping you going? Who supports you? What are you good at? And start with those strengths when we're talking about anything that has to do with the youth so that we can pivot and use those strengths to engage them better. All right. We're actually going to skip this practice and we are going to get to our wrap up just in the interest of time. So, building bridges means choosing curiosity over assumptions, recognizing progress in small steps, and building relationships before seeking compliance. This really means meeting youth where they are and not where they think that they should be. Another couple of reminders, resistance is communication, and our youth behavior often tells us something important about their experiences, their needs, or their level of trust. Remember that engagement happens in small steps, and a text response, a question, or simply showing up can all mean meaningful progress. So, again, praise them for the progress, not for perfection. And relationships come before results. So, building trust, authenticity, and consistency creates the conditions for growth and change. And then one final reflection, I'd love if you can pop it in the chat or you can come off of mute. But after today's context, what's one engagement strategy that you want to strengthen, or what's one thing that you will do differently after today's training? For me, I have to be honest, one thing that I continuously do differently after today's training is I have stopped emailing my youth that don't want to be emailed because it's a waste of my time and a waste of theirs. And I rather just send them a text message. And if it's really necessary, or if the agency that I'm working with requires it, then I will send them an email. But a lot of the times I just reach out to them with a quick text message. Hey, what's going on? Can we meet at such and such time? And that tends to be a much better interaction. Anyone else? All right. Well, it's totally fine if you don't want to. Oh, there you go. Sometimes I have youth that say that they don't want to see me at all, so I don't. Yes. Love that. I also see that we have feedback. I love the visual of the engagement continuum. Thank you. So I would just always urge you guys, I say this all the time as youth peer advocates, our skills don't matter if we don't actually take action. So find at least one step that you can take in the next 30 days and make it actionable for you as a takeaway. As always, we want to know how we did. So thank you, Kezia, for popping in our SurveyMonkey link. We would love to hear from you, know how this training was, whether or not there are things that we can do to improve. And very quickly, I will leave room for questions. If you have them, pop them in the chat, and I'll be sure to answer them after I go through our upcoming events. So we just have a few things I want to tell you guys about. Our next TA training is going to be on August 20th at 11:30 a.m. and we will be talking about strategic storytelling and using our lived experience with purpose. And so we have heard from many of you who said, I want to know how to better use my lived experience. And so we will be touching on that next month. Again, we have our Youth Powered Discord, so feel free to join our server. Or if you are interested in even more storytelling, we have our Storytelling Academy, which is coming specifically to the Hudson River region. And so virtual trainings will take place on Zoom on August 17th, 19th, and 21st from 7 to 8:30 p.m. And then there will be an in-person speak out in Schenectady, New York, if you're interested in that. We still are seeking responses to our managed care questionnaire. So if you're interested, I think most of you in the room have seen it. You can feel free to scan the QR code, or we can pop that in the chat as well, and you can participate in that questionnaire. We have a virtual job fair coming up on the 21st. And so if you are interested in finding a new position, or just know someone who is a youth who might be interested in youth peer advocacy work, they are more than welcome to join us. And I just popped that flyer into the chat so you can share that. We have a couple of agencies that will be partnering with us, so that's fun and exciting. As always, we have our Youth Peer Advocate events and our supervisor cafes here to support you guys every step of the way. And so there is our Lived Experience Cafe, our Youth Peers meeting, and our monthly TA trainings. You can scan the QR code on any of these flyers to join those. And I'm also popping that into the chat. For those that supervise any youth peer advocates directly, or if you want to pass this on to your supervisor, we are more than willing to support them as they figure things out. And we do have some of those calls coming up. The next one for our YPA supervisors will be in August. Last but not least, attached to the event flyer on the second page is always our Youth Peer Advocacy Credential Advisory Committee. And so if you're interested in taking a more leadership role, you can absolutely scan the QR code and fill out the interest form for there. It is a paid opportunity, and so we meet 10 times a year, and youth peer advocates can use their expertise to just be on the committee and help us with different things that are supporting the youth peer advocates. So whether that's going over our credential training, helping us review additional applications or anything like that. So if you're interested, please feel free to scan the interest form. And again, that's found on page 2 of the YPA events flyer that I just shared in the chat. And last but not least, your presence and input are truly valued. We look forward to connecting with you guys again soon. Please feel free to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. If you haven't heard, there is a new episode of Peercast out. So we do have a new podcast episode out. So listen to that wherever you like to listen to your favorite podcast. Should be available on Spotify as well. Without further ado, my name is Mimi Phillips. I'm the Youth Training Coordinator here. If you have any additional questions, we will stick around to answer them. Have a great day, guys.